So now, my name is Gary Hsueh, and I work for Arup, which is a planning and engineering company, consultancy. I'm a transportation planner, and my exposure actually to ATNs goes back when I worked on a study for San Jose Airport, a feasibility study, and I was able to learn a lot from a lot of the, some of the people in the room who know a lot more than I do. But it was really just looking at feasibility of such a system and looking at the risk assessment and some of the business case and the physical feasibility as well, environmental concerns and actual right of way and land and so forth. But then I also have been dabbling in technology in transportation the past few years, and we've been talking about autonomous vehicles and trying to get, actually, when all of that first activity on autonomous vehicles is happening, that was really driven by, I think, technology folks, right? People who are really interested in developing the technology of self-driving cars. And what Arup is really interested in is actually, how does that impact the physical environment, with the nod to Shannon, because I know she's really interested in that as well. But how does that impact our work in terms of advising clients on how to build the next thing that they want to build, meaning a campus development, for example, or an infrastructure or something. How do these new technologies actually influence the built environment, is my point. So we really tend to focus on getting planners and engineers, civil engineers, city planners, as well as academics and others to join in that conversation to really understand, to really understand or talk about those impacts. And that's kind of the vein of what I wanted to bring here to our group today, which is I've labeled it a report from the Automated Vehicle Symposium, which happened in July 2016. That was just a couple months ago in San Francisco, but it's an event that's been happening for about 6 years now, and it really did start as a venue for technologists to gather together and to really kind of nerd out on the technology, right? LiDAR, all the sensor fusion and the security factors and those kinds of things. But really, actually, that event has transitioned and it's grown quite a lot. This year it was more than 1,200 attendees, and they've really gotten, especially the past couple of years, really into talking about the impacts and the ethics and the law and implementation. And so that has become much more interesting to me.
Not to correct you, Gary, but it was created that way. It started that way. There were just only 100 of us there the first year.
Oh, okay.
I'm serious. It started that way because I and Stan Young were invited to represent the transit idea, so to speak, if we could phrase it that. And it's just that there weren't that many people aware that we had started to. So they always envisioned it as this: how do you understand the implications of the technology on the entire thing? It was pretty amazing that first year with only 100 people.
That is amazing, and it's amazing that maybe other people didn't pick up on that.
Right. I mean, no, seriously, I don't think people realize that's exactly how it started.
But I really like the way that that's set up.
But that's what it is.
So in fact, and I think part of it is also that it's co-sponsored by two different organizations.
Exactly.
One which is very focused on the technology of unmanned systems, but then the other is the Transportation Research Board, and a number of people in this room are part of that. It's in the U.S. It's the federally funded, one of the National Academies of Science.
And they started it. So AUVSI came in the second year.
Perfect. See?
See?
People
I'm sorry.
know a lot more than I do.
Sorry about that. It was just been pretty amazing place.
Yeah, that's good. And so this is actually a quick snapshot of the different breakout sessions over the course of that conference. After the morning plenary session for 2 days, then in the afternoons there were these breakout sessions, and that was probably part of the original idea as well. But the interesting thing is that there's so many different topics because it's really focused on autonomous vehicles, with some representation from ATRA and actually Stan is one of the board members of ATRA, to kind of get that Podcar perspective in there as one of the automated transit solutions. But there are many other things that were discussed, and I like the fact that public transport has been in there from the beginning, but it's just also, and I thought that would be the most relevant to this conversation here, especially when this is supposed to be the Podcar conference.
But we have to admit that the automated vehicle people, everybody's interested in what's going on with automated vehicles.
Yeah, just look at the money that's going into that, right? Just think about all of these car companies and many other companies investing in that technology. There's something about it that is really attractive to a lot of people. And maybe there is something from that event that we can learn as a group here. I'm not going to kind of get into what I think we need to pick up from that. I think that's for everyone here to think about, what is the relationship of our Podcar topic in relationship to automated vehicles, and particularly in terms of public transport and shared mobility. So that's the breakout session that I kind of helped put together, with support from other people, and there were basically 6 different sessions within that breakout that I wanted to share with you, and I'll go over those in a little more detail. The very first one was just quick bursts, just learning about all of the stuff that is going on now, that's out there, and I'll just cover a few of these, and I'll notice that Robert is in the room.
He was.
Yeah, there he is. Okay, so I'll feature his as well, one of his slides, but I think the past year or two, actually, in terms of public transport and automated last mile solutions, has really it's really been like the year of pilots. We've really seen that in that space. Now, and I'll cover that. This is one example that we learned about in Contra Costa County, which is in California, with a test bed. That's called GoMentum Station. This particular demonstration, it is similar to the ones in Rochelle and City Mobile 2, in having one of those manufacturers bring a couple of vehicles over to the United States and see how they work in a business park that are running on private streets. So it's a fairly limited prototype demonstration. This is a slide that I borrowed from Robert, so don't worry, I'm not giving away all of your secrets, right? So.
It's not a secret. Dennis presented yesterday, so please go ahead.
There you go. Okay, so you guys know about this. All right, and then actually having some results from City Mobile 2 that's really focused on certain aspects, and this I think is really interesting. When we kind of think about how we cost things in this industry, in the Podcar industry, and the costs that we take into account, and the escalations and the risks that we put on our projects, how does that compare? This is something else that we're seeing out in the wild, where folks are definitely calculating cost per mile and cost per passenger mile, cost per operating hour, and notice that in this description there is no cost for infrastructure. Right, that's already provided for something that's on-road running. So I think that's an interesting comparison for us. We also did a session on federal funding opportunities and research that's being conducted primarily by the United States Department of Transportation. So I won't really go into those too much, other than the fact that there is a lot of activity going on now, finally, at the highest level of government, and having more opportunities to do research in on-road automation is really how it's applied. We also had a kind of a Shark Tank, which was just an opportunity for some pretend or would-be startups to pitch their idea to some of our transportation experts, and I think that's also another kind of skill that has to be learned and practiced, of actually pitching for an idea. And I think that in this industry there's been a lot of pitching for many years. I mean, that's been going on for decades. But what is it about the pitch that's really compelling to people? And I think overall we're seeing the trend that it's things like sustainability and congestion reduction, a lot of things that we do talk about, but it's also thinking about, well, how do you really push the right buttons of the audience? Who is the audience? Who are you talking to? Who are you presenting to? What are they interested in? And how does our solution make sense in terms of what they need? We then had several discussions, and it was kind of set up to be this kind of one discussion leading to another. One is this integration of public and private models, and by that we meant that there are many more opportunities being tested and ideas being tested of private operators providing services for the public good. Now I take it, in Europe there's plenty of concessions and so that's relatively new in the United States. But here we were seeing more evidence of collaboration with companies like Uber and with Lyft, and with Bridge and Chariot, and those are all actually they start to perform a quasi-public function of providing public transport services. So I think it was interesting to kind of see especially in the United States context, how do we realize that kind of setup? And realizing that if a private company provides that kind of service, they also need to take into account the liability of providing that service. So that's kind of a new role for the ride-sharing companies, I think. And also understanding that, how do you serve a person with disabilities, for example, who has a wheelchair and can't fit in a ride-sharing vehicle? Then, what is the right way to hand off that responsibility? So realizing that maybe you can't use a ride-sharing company for everything. That was interesting. Another is, what is public transport in the future? So kind of taking that public and private discussion, moving into, well, is there a shared vision for us for how public transport looks like in the future? And I think I'll talk a little bit more about that. I have a couple of notes about that. But briefly, it's about how are autonomous vehicles and automated vehicles, how are they changing the face of public transport? Are public transport operators actually going to change as a result of these market forces that are happening? How is ridership going to change? How are the economics going to change? And then finally, kind of going from there into, okay, well, if we do have a shared vision of public transport in the future, then what do we need to do as an industry to promote that vision? And what policy changes are required to make that vision a reality? It's not sufficient anymore just to simply point out that there's a heaven scenario and a hell scenario of automated vehicles, right? That's been done 2 or 3 years ago. So really it's about, okay, well, which one of those scenarios in that range of scenarios, what do we really want? Thank you. And how do we get there? So here are some key findings, and I probably won't go over all of them, but the point is that we have an opportunity. One of the points is that we have an opportunity to use new technologies to provide this shared public transportation service, and that I think it's important for us not to get left behind in providing public transport in the face of autonomous vehicles that really could get us into that hell scenario. Not just first and last mile connections. I think if we think about on-road running vehicles that are automated, it doesn't have to just be first and last mile. It could also include underserved populations, meaning different areas of cities and areas that lack transit service. That's actually a much broader market. It's not just the areas right around a train station. And cities and sites are different, so I think with the history of PRT, there's been a lot of very location-specific feasibility studies. I think that makes sense. And now we're seeing a lot more interest in having public tests, and at the local level. Pilot programs are very popular these days. There are many funding opportunities. There's a lot in terms of policy development that's needed. And in terms of the final two slides are recommended actions that came out of this breakout session. And I think there actually are quite a few similarities with Podcar industry. So it's not just automated transit in a broader sense. So really think about the user focus, public-private partnerships, not relying on government to provide all of the funding, and all of the conservatism that may come with that. Therefore, adding flexibility in how systems are procured and how technology is procured. Establishing safety standards, encouraging pilot programs, and then really sharing the information that's learned. So, thank you.